studios. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. You thought Gold Star families had some pointed words for the Biden administration a few weeks back when they appeared before a hearing organized by Congressman Darrell Issa.
I learned so much at that hearing. And especially the fact, too, that they said, you know, we feel your pain because our son was brought home in a flag-draped coffin when they were with him when he died in a hospital bed in America, and he died from cancer.
Well, if you thought you heard pointed words back then, you haven't heard anything yet. Gold Star dad, Mark Schmitz, who's the father of Marine Lance Corporal Jared Schmitz, one of the 13 who was killed in that bombing at the Kabul airport, appeared before the House Foreign Affairs Committee yesterday. And Mr. Schmitz had this to say.
Not a single person has been held accountable. Our so-called leader can't seem to even utter their names in public, not even once. Mr. Biden has run his entire political campaign for 50 years as the family man. Well, I've got news for you, sir. The curtain has been lifting, and that campaign slogan will never work again. We have seen what's going on in your family, and even worse, we've seen how you've been treating us as Gold Star families. And there couldn't be anything more disgusting and cowardly than the way you have treated us. You are a disgrace to this nation. You have no business having ultimate command over our military, and I regret not saying that to your face when I had the opportunity in Dover. I felt it more important to bite my tongue, but I also had more important things on my mind at that time, like receiving my son's lifeless body stateside. While I stood there on the tarmac, watching you check your watch over and over again, all I wanted to do was shout out, "It's 2:30. But out of respect to the other grieving families, I bit my tongue once again. Well, as you could probably tell by now, I'm done biting my tongue. You, sir, stole their lives, their futures, their dreams, and have ripped apart 13 families. You cannot even man up and admit that. You, sir, gave us all the title Gold Star family. You, sir, discredit honor and integrity. 2 years later, there are things I find myself thinking about. Where and what was Biden's logic sneaking out of Bagram in the middle of the night before ever getting a single Afghan partner or American civilian out? This is the purest definition of intentional negligence. This is just one of many irresponsible and negligent decisions coming from the White House. In addition, leaving behind billions of dollars of our finest military hardware has led to the biggest international free market in history. Unfortunately, this will undoubtedly lead to more American military lives lost in the future. Between what has been happening here domestically, for example, the border, over the last 2.5 years, and all your failed foreign policy decisions, I would venture a guess that you have more American blood on your hands, Mr. Biden, than any president in U.S. history.
And to spit in their face even further, President Biden went on national television and called the mission and said that it was a successful mission.
It's 2:30, a-hole.
Oh, my God.
Love it. There's another indignity that the American people are suffering collectively, in addition to the indignity we suffer collectively when our military men and women are treated as they have been, as Mr. Schmitz nicely articulated. And that's when support from the federal government, consistent with its stated responsibilities and the purposes for which they extracted money from us, like providing disaster relief, support for Americans is tied to support for non-Americans. And this was a piece we played, actually, when we talked to KT McFarland last week, an ad that or video that Heritage Foundation put out arguing that it is not appropriate to tie disaster relief funds, whether it's for wildfires in Maui or California or
Hurricanes
hurricane
in
in
Florida.
Florida,
Yeah.
not appropriate to tie those funds to more money in support of Ukraine's war against the Russians. Kevin Roberts is the president of the Heritage Foundation. He joins us now. Kevin, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Dan and Amy, it's a pleasure. Thanks for everything you're doing.
Yeah, so I mean, I just want to make sure we understand it correctly because we talk to Carafano and Dakota Wood all the time on this show, and what the Heritage Foundation was arguing is just specifically that it's not necessarily a comment on America's support for the Ukrainian effort to repel the Russians, but it is the idea that you don't tie those two together. You do your job to provide relief for Americans, and then you have a separate conversation about the kind of support we should provide for Ukraine or any other foreign nation.
You got it exactly right, Dan. And you know, the way I put it, and thank you, by the way, for having Carafano and Dakota on. They're awesome. The way I put it is, it doesn't matter what someone thinks about continuing military aid to Ukraine. Heritage does have some qualms about that, and I'll come back to that point in a minute. But just put that potential difference of opinion off to the side. We are suffering in Washington, D.C., and I know this comes as a great surprise, by the president and his allies in Congress jamming members by tying disaster relief aid, whether it's the wildfire, you know, the hurricane today or the hurricane next week, if there will be one, with a vote on Ukraine military aid. And our qualm with that at Heritage is the American people deserve an up or down vote just on a standalone bill on disaster relief and then on Ukraine military aid. We have had a grand total of 4 hours and 41 minutes of conversation on the floor of the House and the floor of the Senate since March of last year on well over $100 billion of expenditure on Ukraine. Some of that, in our opinion, to sum up here, is good because it's focused on military aid, but so much of it is not based on military aid, and all of it is being sent to them without any conversation about strategy, about end game, about what red lines are. Obviously, that's something that has to change, and the way the president is going about this conversation is designed to prevent having that discussion.
Well, how are they holding like hurricane funds hostage for more Ukraine war money?
Technically, the way it works, Amy, is that when the members of the House and Senate come back to work next week, they will be talking about the supplemental package to the fiscal year's annual budget. And rather than have one bill that is focused on Ukraine military aid and just that and have a debate about that, what they're doing is they're taking that one bill and they're wedding it to the bill on disaster relief aid. Because what they're trying to do is make sure that the growing number of members of the House and Senate who are opposed to continuing military aid to Ukraine feel guilty for voting down the disaster relief aid. It's a typical Washington gimmick.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, too. I mean, why would anybody have any questions about the same people managing America's role in that war in Ukraine after, well, what you just heard from that Gold Star father, what happened in Kabul? And by the way, House Republicans are on the job on this. The question about whether or not the sniper was denied permission to shoot the terrorist who detonated the bomb at the Kabul airport, killing 13 American troops and 170 others. The commanding officer at the time, Marine Lieutenant Colonel Brad Whitted, is going to appear before the House Foreign Affairs Committee on September 11th to answer questions about that. So there's an opportunity to get a little bit more context here, but you can understand the frustration of Gold Star families, obviously, and you can also understand the suspicions of people generally with respect to the management of funds and human assets by this administration.
No, that's so well said, Dan. I interviewed in the weekly show that I do for Heritage a Gold Star dad, and his son was killed in Afghanistan, not during the withdrawal, but some years prior to that. And while he did not want to get into political or policy conversations, he said, "I'll leave that to Heritage." He clearly is dismayed by one thing in particular, and it's the lack of trust the American people have in this administration. And whether that's the just poignant testimony that you played in this segment from that dad, or whether it's about Ukraine military aid, what Heritage is saying is there is a world that exists potentially where we would support military aid to Ukraine. But that world doesn't exist as long as this president of the United States refuses to have a conversation about why, in fact, we're there. I mean, I think we have a pretty good understanding. We all want Russia to lose. But what's the end game? At what point is it too much money? At what point do we draw a red line and say, oh, my gosh, the only way to break this stalemate, and at best that's what this is a stalemate, is to send American troops. Heritage would be apoplectic about that. That's the conversation we're trying to force because of the ineptitude, because of the incompetence of this administration.
He is Kevin Roberts, president of the Heritage Foundation. Kevin, thank you as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you all for your work. Take care.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Or you see it on TV, share it on Facebook, or read about it in the paper. Hear it here first. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
The roof was